Hello.
I stood by the mirror in my office, adjusting the soft waves of my hair and smoothing the sleek, black pencil skirt that hugged my curves perfectly. The faint echo of students bustling down the hall drifted in, blending with the rhythmic clatter of my heels as I made my way toward the lecture hall. At 33, I had mastered the art of effortless elegance, high heels, tailored blazers, and the kind of confidence that turned heads without trying. I saw it in their eyes, the students. They admired me, even when they thought I didn't notice. But today wasn't just any lecture. Today, my nephew Daniel sat in the front row. It was a strange twist of fate that had placed us in this position. He had just started his first year at the medical university where I'd been teaching biology for nearly a decade. The moment I received the list of students and saw his name, something inside me twisted, a mixture of pride and nostalgia. I still remembered the boy he once was, the child who used to run toward me with open arms, excitedly chattering about everything from his new school shoes to the stray cat he'd befriended. Back then, I was his world, the cool aunt who brought him ice cream and let him stay up late when his parents weren't watching. But time had a way of stealing those moments. He grew up and I got busy. The playful closeness we once shared faded, replaced by polite small talk at family gatherings. He had become a young man, and I had immersed myself in academic life, my schedule packed with research, lectures, and late nights grading papers. The last time we truly spent time together felt like a distant memory.
Until now.
As I entered the lecture hall, the hum of conversation hushed. I placed my notes on the podium and glanced up. There he was, seated near the front, his head tilted slightly as he scribbled something in his notebook. His hair, a tousled mess, framed a face that had matured in ways I hadn't fully noticed until now. The awkward teenager I remembered had disappeared, replaced by someone with a quiet confidence that unnerved me in the most unexpected way. I cleared my throat. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Introductory Biology. The lecture began smoothly, diagrams, cellular processes, and the basics of genetic material. I was in my element, moving through the topics with ease, until I made the mistake of looking directly at him. Our eyes met for a brief second, and something shifted. It wasn't just recognition, it was acknowledgement. He wasn't the little boy from family dinners anymore, and I wasn't just his aunt. Here, in this space, I was his professor. The weight of that realization pressed down on me, and for the first time in years, I felt off balance. After class, I gathered my things, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But as I turned to leave, I heard his voice behind me. Aunt Lily. I froze. The sound of my name from his lips was strange, as if it carried a different meaning now. I turned slowly, masking my unease with a practiced smile. Daniel, how was the first day? He shrugged, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. Good. But I have to admit, it's weird seeing you here. It's like two worlds colliding. I laughed softly, though his words struck a chord. Tell me about it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway had mostly emptied, leaving us in a quiet pocket of space where the air felt thicker than it should. He looked at me, his gaze steady in a way that felt more mature than I remembered. You always look so put together, he said, almost as if the thought slipped out without permission. It's like you haven't aged a day. The compliment caught me off guard, and I felt warmth creep up my neck. I brushed it off with a laugh, but the flutter in my chest lingered. Flattery won't get you an A, Daniel. He smirked. Good to know. I knew I should leave, create distance before this conversation wandered into uncomfortable territory. But part of me hesitated, caught between the familiarity of our shared past and the unspoken tension simmering beneath the surface. We should catch up sometime, he offered casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You know, outside of class. The suggestion hung between us, tempting and dangerous. I nodded, hoping he couldn't see the conflict written across my face. Maybe, if I find the time. But as I walked away, the click of my heels echoing through the corridor, I knew that wasn't entirely true. It wasn't time that I was afraid of finding. It was the possibility of what might happen if I did. The next day began like any other, coffee brewing in the staff lounge, emails waiting in my inbox, and the sound of footsteps echoing down the long corridor of the biology department. I had carefully planned the morning's lecture, determined to bury myself in the comfort of structure and professionalism. But beneath the calm surface, my mind kept drifting back to yesterday, back to Daniel. When I walked into the lecture hall, the soft murmur of students faded, replaced by the familiar routine of settling notebooks and laptops. My heels clicked across the floor, steady and composed, even as my heartbeat raced beneath the fabric of my silk blouse. Today's topic was genetics, something I could lecture about in my sleep, but the thought of seeing him in the crowd again made my fingers tighten around the edge of my textbook. I scanned the room casually, pretending to check the seating arrangement, but I wasn't fooling myself. I was looking for him. And then, there he was, third row, center seat. His gaze met mine instantly, like he had been waiting for it. There was no nervousness, no awkward hesitation. Just a quiet, steady confidence that sent a shiver down my spine. I cleared my throat, breaking the connection, and turned my attention to the board. Today, we'll be diving into Mendelian inheritance, I began, the chalk sliding smoothly as I wrote out the foundational concepts. For the next 40 minutes, I talked about dominant and recessive traits, Punnett squares, and genetic probabilities. My voice never wavered, but inside, I was hyper-aware of Daniel's presence. The way he leaned forward slightly, as if he were hanging on every word. The way he tapped his pen against his notebook during pauses, his eyes tracing my movements. And then, during a brief Q&A session, he raised his hand. "Yes, Daniels?" He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that felt loaded, like it carried more than just curiosity about the lesson. "I was wondering, Professor," he said, the title rolling off his tongue in a way that sounded far too intimate, "how often genetic anomalies defy the typical Mendelian patterns?" I paused, briefly thrown off by the way he phrased it. Not the question itself, but the way his gaze locked on mine, challenging me, teasing me. "Excellent question," I replied, keeping my tone as professional as possible. "There are many cases where non-Mendelian inheritance plays a role, such as incomplete dominance and epistasis. But perhaps we can discuss those nuances further during office hours." His lips quirked upward, and for a moment, it felt like we were having a conversation meant for no one else but us. When class ended, students began filing out, their chatter filling the air like static. I gathered my textbooks and notes, placing them neatly into a pile on the podium. I could feel him watching me, even as I kept my head down, pretending to be absorbed in packing up my things. My fingers brushed the edge of the last book when I heard his voice, low and casual. "Need some help with those?" I looked up and found him standing beside me, closer than I had expected. His expression was relaxed, but there was something in his eyes, something that hinted at the unspoken tension between us. "I wouldn't mind," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray the flutter in my chest. He grabbed half the stack, easily balancing the books against his arm, and gestured toward the door. "Lead the way, Professor." We walked down the corridor in silence, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly. My office was just a short distance away, but the quiet between us felt heavier with every step. When we reached the door, I unlocked it and gestured for him to follow me inside. The air was cooler here, the soft hum of the overhead lights casting a gentle glow over the room. I placed my books on the desk, and he did the same, pausing for a moment before turning to face me. "You've really made biology interesting," he said, leaning casually against a desk as if he had all the time in the world. "Most professors don't have that effect." I smiled politely, though his compliment struck deeper than it should have. "I'm glad you think so. It's not just the subject," he added, his gaze soft but unwavering. "It's you?" My breath caught, and for a brief moment, the air between us seemed to hum with electricity. I should have shut it down right then and there. I should have laughed it off, told him to focus on his studies, or reminded him that compliments wouldn't earn him any favors. But instead, I found myself stepping closer, close enough to see the flecks of green in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him. "Daniel," I said softly, unsure of what I was even about to say. "You're very confident, aren't you?" He tilted his head slightly, a playful smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I wasn't always," he admitted. "But you make it easy." The honesty in his words disarmed me, and I had to look away, pretending to adjust the stack of papers on my desk. My fingers fumbled slightly, betraying the composure I was trying so hard to maintain. "You shouldn't say things like that," I whispered, not entirely sure who I was trying to convince, him or myself. "Why not?" His voice was calm, steady, as if he wasn't afraid of the line we were walking. "I meant it." I turned to face him again, and for a moment, I felt as though we were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could either break us or pull us in deeper. His gaze lingered on mine, and I could see the silent question in his eyes, the same question that had been circling in my mind since yesterday. "Should we?" "I think you should go," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, as if he understood the conflict inside me. "Okay," he replied, but before he turned to leave, he hesitated, his hand brushing lightly against mine. The touch was brief, fleeting, but it left an imprint that I knew I wouldn't forget anytime soon. As the door closed behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My fingers trembled slightly as I leaned against the desk, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The line had been drawn, but I wasn't sure how much longer either of us could keep from crossing it. I stepped out of the university building into the crisp evening air, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting everything in shades of deep orange and blue. The familiar weight of the day still clung to me, but my mind wasn't on work or the lecture I had just delivered. It was on Daniel. I spotted him leaning casually against a lamppost near the entrance, hands in the pockets of his dark jacket, his hair tousled just enough to look effortlessly cool. My breath hitched for a moment, though I quickly composed myself. I wasn't surprised to see him. After the way we had parted earlier in my office, the lingering glances, the unspoken tension, I had a feeling he wasn't done yet. As I walked toward him, his gaze found mine and softened, the corners of his lips lifting in a way that made my heart betray me with its sudden quickening. "Waiting for someone?" I teased lightly, trying to keep things casual, though the way my pulse fluttered made it hard to maintain. "Yeah," he said, without a hint of hesitation. "You?" The simplicity of his answer disarmed me, leaving me momentarily speechless. Before I could think of a clever response, he took a step closer, closing the gap between us just enough for his presence to feel like gravity pulling me in. "Let me take you to a cafe," he said, his voice warm and inviting, as if the suggestion was as natural as breathing. "Just to talk." "Nothing more." I hesitated, glancing toward the street, where a familiar black sedan waited by the curb. The man inside was already watching me, and the sight of him made reality come crashing back. My husband. The man who had promised to pick me up tonight. I had told myself this was just a normal evening, that I would leave work and go home like always. But standing here with Daniel, I realized there was nothing normal about this moment. "I can't," I said softly, lowering my gaze. "I have someone waiting for me." There was a brief pause, and when I looked back up, I saw it, the faintest flicker of disappointment in his eyes, quickly masked by the same confidence that had become his signature. He didn't push, didn't press for an explanation. Instead, he nodded, as if accepting it with grace. "Okay," he murmured. "But for the record, it's not because you don't want to." My breath caught. The way he said it wasn't a question. It was a quiet statement, filled with a certainty that left me shaken. He knew. He saw right through me, past the polite rejection and straight into the war I was fighting within myself. Before I could respond, he stepped back, offering me a small, knowing smile. "Good night, Professor." His voice was gentle but carried weight, as if the word professor held more meaning than it should. I watched him walk away, his silhouette disappearing into the glow of the streetlights. My heart ached in a way I hadn't expected, and when I climbed into the car and greeted my husband, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind. That night, long after my husband had fallen asleep beside me, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The memory of Daniel's gaze, the way he said, "It's not because you don't want to," played over and over in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. I closed my eyes, willing myself to forget, to push it aside and focus on my life as it was. But the ache in my chest reminded me that some things aren't easily ignored. Just as I was about to drift off, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, my heart already racing as if I knew who it was before I even checked. The message was short, but it hit me like a storm. "Don't let your husband pick you up after work tomorrow. I'll take care of it." I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly as adrenaline surged through me. The audacity of it, how boldly he assumed I would agree, how confidently he inserted himself into my carefully controlled life, should have made me angry. But it didn't. Instead, it thrilled me. I bit my lip, torn between fear and anticipation. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure whether to respond. Every logical part of me screamed to delete the message, to ignore it, and pretend this wasn't happening. But another part, the part that had felt something awaken within me today, wanted to say yes. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. The next morning, I was restless. I changed outfits twice before settling on a fitted burgundy dress that hugged me in all the right places and paired it with heels that made me feel just the right mix of powerful and vulnerable. The kind of outfit you wear when you want to be noticed, even if you're not ready to admit it. Throughout the day, I tried to focus on my lectures and meetings, but my mind kept wandering. I checked my phone more times than I cared to admit, half expecting another message from him. But the screen remained silent, as if he knew he didn't need to remind me. I was already thinking about him. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the last class, my pulse quickened. I gathered my things slowly, trying to delay the inevitable. But eventually, I made my way to the exit, where the cool breeze greeted me like an old friend. And there he was, leaning against his car, arms crossed casually over his chest. He waited with the same quiet confidence that had undone me yesterday. His gaze met mine, and just like that, the world around us seemed to blur. "Right on time," he said, pushing off the car and opening the passenger door. I hesitated, standing on the edge of a decision that I knew would change everything. My breath came out in a shaky exhale, and I glanced around, as if looking for an escape route. But there was none. "Are you coming?" His voice was soft, but there was no mistaking the challenge in it. I swallowed hard, my heels clicking softly against the pavement as I closed the distance between us. When I slipped into the seat, the warmth of the leather felt like a cocoon, wrapping me in a moment I couldn't run from. As he slid into the driver's seat, his hand brushed mine briefly, and I felt that familiar spark again, the one that had started this and refused to let me go. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, the kind of smile that made my pulse race. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere you can just be yourself." And as the car pulled away from the university, I knew that whatever boundaries had once existed between us were no longer strong enough to hold. The only question was how far I was willing to let this go. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a rooftop bathed in golden light. The soft hum of the city below mixed with the clinking of wine glasses and the gentle murmur of conversation. A cool evening breeze brushed against my skin as I stepped out onto the terrace, my heels clicking against the sleek stone floor. The view stretched endlessly before me, skyscrapers glittering like jewels under the dark velvet sky, their lights flickering like stars trapped on Earth. Daniel stood just a step behind me, his presence warm and steady. "You like it?" he asked softly, his voice close to my ear. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. "It's beautiful," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant the view or the moment. He smiled, a soft, knowing smile that sent a flutter through my chest, and gently took my hand, leading me to a small table near the edge of the rooftop. A flickering candle sat in the center, casting a warm glow over the white linen tablecloth. The intimacy of it all was overwhelming, yet I felt no urge to pull away. I felt at ease. As we settled into our seats, a waiter appeared with a bottle of wine. Daniel gestured for him to pour, and soon, the rich, ruby-red liquid swirled in our glasses. I watched as he raised his glass, the candlelight dancing in his eyes. "To you," he said, his voice smooth but sincere. "The most beautiful professor on campus, and the only one who could make genetics interesting." I laughed softly, the compliment disarming me. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted my glass and clinked it gently against his. "To surprises," I replied, feeling the warmth of the wine spread through me after the first sip. He didn't take his eyes off me, even as he swirled the glass in his hand. "I meant what I said," he added, his gaze unwavering. "You have this way of making everything around you seem brighter. Even when you're just walking down the hallway, it's hard not to notice." Heat crept up my neck, and I lowered my eyes to the table, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. Compliments from students were common, but this felt different. It wasn't shallow or fleeting, it felt real, as if he saw more than what was on the surface. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice barely audible over the gentle breeze. The evening unfolded in waves of warmth and indulgence. Daniel ordered a variety of dishes, tender steak, creamy risotto, and small plates of appetizers that melted on my tongue. We shared everything, passing plates between us and laughing when our forks clinked in the middle. The wine flowed freely, loosening the tension I had carried with me all day, and by the time dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate mousse, I was fully immersed in the moment. The city lights twinkled below us like scattered diamonds, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. No responsibilities, no deadlines, no lingering guilt pressing down on me. Just the feeling of being wanted, seen, and understood. At some point during the night, Daniel stood and extended his hand toward me. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and inviting. I placed my hand in his without hesitation, and he led me toward the edge of the terrace, where a glass barrier separated us from the world below. The view was breathtaking, buildings stretching as far as the eye could see, their reflections shimmering in the river that snaked through the city. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, I felt his arms wrap around me from behind, pulling me gently against his chest. His warmth seeped through my dress, and I closed my eyes, surrendering to the comfort of his embrace. "You're incredible," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Do you know that?" I shook my head slightly, unable to speak. My heart was racing, and I knew if I opened my mouth, I might say something I couldn't take back. He chuckled softly, the sound vibrating through me. "You don't believe me," he said, tightening his hold just enough to make my breath hitch. "But you should." I turned my head slightly, and our eyes met, his gaze filled with something tender yet dangerous. Slowly, as if giving me time to pull away, he leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my temple. The world seemed to tilt, the city spinning below us as I fought to steady myself. "Daniel," I whispered, unsure whether I was warning him or begging him to continue. He pulled back slightly, just enough to study my face. "I know," he murmured, "but I can't help it. Neither could I." We returned to the table, finishing the last sips of wine in comfortable silence. My thoughts swirled like the wine in my glass, messy, intoxicating, and impossible to control. I knew this wasn't right, but sitting across from him, watching the way he looked at me like I was the only person who mattered, made it easy to forget the boundaries I was supposed to keep. When the evening drew to a close, he insisted on driving me home. I hesitated at first, but the thought of sitting in his car, with the soft hum of the engine and the lingering warmth of the night surrounding us, was too tempting to resist. The drive was quiet, but it wasn't awkward. His hand rested on the gear shift, and I found myself glancing at it, wondering what it would feel like if he reached over and touched me. I shook the thought away, pressing my palms together in my lap. As we approached my neighborhood, I pointed to a street corner just a block away from my house. "You can drop me off here," I said softly. "I don't want my husband to see." His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded without protest. He pulled over, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The street was quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I reached for the door handle, but before I could open it, his hand gently touched my arm. I turned to face him, and before I could react, his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he were testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, it deepened, his hand moving to the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair. I melted into him, my body betraying every logical thought that told me this was wrong. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. His eyes searched mine, as if waiting for a sign that I regretted it. But I didn't. "Good night, Professor," he whispered, his voice laced with something that felt like a promise. I nodded, unable to find the words. As I stepped out of the car and watched him drive away, I felt the cool night air wrap around me, grounding me in the reality of what had just happened. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt afraid. But all I felt was the warmth of his lips still lingering on mine, and the undeniable truth that this wasn't the end.
Bye.